Very good to see you all. Awesome to have you here today. Drop in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. I am coming to you from my studio in New Jersey. I kind of wish, I want to treat this today like we're all together in my studio. Very conversational. Let's have a conversation today. That's much more fun to me. As Tara said, I am the resident artist for the brands under the company of Collage, which is Winsor & Newton, our sister brands Liquitex, and also LeFranc Bourgeois. And we're going to be talking about Flash today. We're going to be talking about a favorite artist of mine, Matisse, as well. I like to think of art in the context of those who influence us. Certainly throughout my career, I was a former college art professor. I went to art school before that. I've been influenced by past professors, by colleagues, by peers, by artists that I've seen in galleries and museums, and Matisse is one of them. And if you saw my work today, you wouldn't necessarily think that. So I don't think that inspiration always directly shows in somebody's work. Sometimes it shows or it comes out in process and such. So we're going to have a good conversation today. And as Tara said, fire away with questions. I've thought this through really well. So there's a lot of things I'll probably preemptively answer. And hey, I see Birmingham, Alabama coming up there, and Virginia and other cool places. That's awesome. I have a lot of things I'm going to cover that I'll probably preemptively answer about the Flash products, but you fire away as well. I also want you to feel comfortable like you are in my studio with me. And so if you want to ask questions about art in general while we're doing things, because we're going to mix color, we're going to apply color, we're going to cut things to collage, I want you to feel free to do that like we're hanging out. We've got we've got a glass of wine, whatever it is, and we're in my studio hanging out. So with that in mind, I'm gonna do a lot of flipping back and forth from my overhead camera to front facing. And as Tara mentioned, there's a few Instagram channels there, or Instagram feeds, and you can check out what I do at Jimmy Leslie Art. A lot of daily sketches and things, because I like to work in my sketchbook on a pretty much daily basis. Of course, there's Plaza_art as well. Definitely do that for the giveaway, and LeFranc Bourgeois official as well. And Tara just is popping those in the chat for everyone as well, so you can see that there, and also in the recording. So we're going to be making this image today. Now, yeah, Tara, so I guess it's not very fall-like by you either. It's about 77 Fahrenheit today, but I'm a summer guy, so I kind of dig that. So the leaves in my yard right now look like this. They are starting to drop, but they don't look fall-like. Well, I guess one of them kind of does. It depends on the type of tree. I don't even know what species that is. I'm not good with identifying my trees, but nonetheless, we're going to take a look at Matisse and all these beautiful colors from Flash. We're going to dive into it right away, though. I want to talk to you about the products and Matisse, the artist, the man himself, but we need to get going with color first. So I'm going to move that off to the side, and there's some cool stuff I'm going to show you here in a little bit. I really like this. It's an antique book. I'll show you some cool stuff, but I want to move ahead here and show you. This is the surface that I'm going to use. So I mentioned our sister company, Winsor & Newton. This is a new mixed media pad. It's 135-pound weight, good for wet and dry media. So the reason I chose this, you might say, well, if you've done mixed media work or collage work in the past, you might have used watercolor paper, and you certainly could. The reason I chose this is because while you could use watercolor paper for what we're going to do, I like people to get the best value out of their products. And watercolor paper is a little bit over-engineered, let's say, for the project we're doing today. So this weight and this very slight texture, and the fact that it can be used for wet and dry media, it's really going to be great for us today. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a page. I'm actually going to do this. It's perforated. This will be easier because you know what's happened in the past? I've covered a page with something, and then while it's drying, I've wanted to take it out, and then I can't handle it well. So I'm going to already take the perforated page. I'm just going to bend that on the perforation. Let's see if I can get a clean tear when I do that. Yeah, there we go. You can hear that. That's kind of a satisfying noise. So I'm going to have that. And what we're going to do first is get some color down on this sheet that we can cut out to create these leaf shapes. And when I made this, actually, I started with the ground, and then I moved to these green, semi-abstract shapes, thinking of grass, even though it's not grass, but thinking of it because Matisse thought sometimes in semi-abstract ways. And this strip to me, which is reminiscent of the sky, but we're not going to work backwards because I want to cut these things and I want them to dry first. So we're going to get those colors down. So what I used is, this is Flash Ruby Red, and you can see those that information on the back of the tubes and jars as well. So Ruby Red, this one is magenta, so more of a bluish red, or more of a neutral red with Ruby Red, more of a bluish red. Japanese orange, it's a really bold, bright orange, and obviously we'll see that when we break them out. We'll use some yellow ochre. This is a tiny tube and I'm running out of that one, so I'm actually gonna use a little bit of this Naples yellow color as well. Nice thing about this stuff, you don't have to have the exact colors. It's great if you do, that's fine, but you don't have to. If you had a different shade of red, great. Leaves are different shades of red in the fall, unlike now. So we'll do that. I'm going to get some of those out, and I'm going to take my palette. I've got all sorts of palettes in my studio, but just for right now, I've got a disposable palette here. So I'm going to put out some of these colors. Here's our Ruby Red. And I'll talk more about when we get into it more about I like the jars. They're sort of, I kind of think they're kind of elegant. They look pretty high class. I don't know if it's the glass, the shininess. That's the Ruby Red. Let's go with the magenta next. I'll put down some of my Japanese orange. Now, I'm putting down possibly more than I might need. I get a little free with my colors, being the resident artist for the brand. I can get more pretty easily. So I tend to be a little bit free, but I will say this to you, that whenever you're painting, if you're doing anything, one of the things that happens a lot of times, I feel, is that sometimes people put so little paint out on a palette that then they go to mix a color, they use it, and then they need to mix more because they were really, really, I get that. We want to be scrimpy about our color a little bit because, listen, it costs to buy good color. So just don't be too stingy about that when you put things down. You can always put out more though. So I'm going to put that out, and then I'm going to crack this jar of Naples yellow. And pardon me while I reach off to the side. Didn't have my palette knife out, but I just reached that. Things are in pretty close proximity to me here in my studio. I'm going to put some of that out. Anytime I'm using a palette knife with these jars, I want to make sure that I wipe it off really, really well. And I'm just using an old t-shirt here because I try to do that as opposed to a paper towel, just so I can, not waste so much, and I can use this over and over again. So I will mix up a few colors, but I want to show you this. You can see this is where I cut out some of the shapes that you see here, some of the leaf shapes that you see here. And I want you to notice how free I sort of was with doing that. You can see some of that orange. You can see more of the reds. You can see more of the ochres. And in the way I applied it to a sheet, which is what I will do here, I was very free about that. I didn't cover a whole sheet with one color because I like that. I consider myself, if you check out my work, you'll notice, where I think you will, I'm what I call myself a painterly painter. I like brushstrokes. And to me, in doing something like this, you could go very flat with your application of color. But if I find that one leaf that is changing, right, it's got those subtle changes in there. So I kind of like that. Once again, not right or wrong stuff today, but yeah, let me mix up a little. I'm gonna drag some of that that orange over there, the Japanese orange, and I'm gonna take a little bit of yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is a cool, earthy pigment. So I mixed that up, and you can see how it really, let's bring you up. I want to bring you closer for that. Let's bring it closer. You can see how that still maintains the orange, but it knocks it down. It shifts it because it is very, very earthy. But I'm going to add a little bit more to that. And I'm just going to take that. I'll mix up more colors, but I'm going to move that off to the side here. I happen to be using a Winsor & Newton Cotman brush. It's a 3/4 brush. And this is a 9x12 piece of paper here. So that'll cover pretty well. I could use a bigger one if I wanted, but I'm going to be free about putting this down on the surface. If I don't get a load of paint on there, some of the white will show through the paper. Again, I don't mind that. Your aesthetic may be a bit different than mine in that you may want to have none of the white showing through. Maybe you're not a painterly person like I am. While I have that there, I've got my water right here. This is just an old, I think it's from Trader Joe's. I think baked beans were in here originally. So it's just, there's probably some really cool cleaning containers you can get from Plaza, I'm sure as well. This just happens to be something I have in the studio. And it's a little tuna can down there that I've drilled holes in. So when I rinse my brush in there, the pigments will fall down between those holes down at the bottom. I will tell you this, I like to try to create as little wastewater as possible. So I always try to try first to get as much paint off the brush on whatever surface I'm working on, right? Don't waste it. Then I try to really wipe it off really good as much as possible, and then come in here and clean that off. And that's going to leave a little water on my brush. And while that does, I'm going to mix some of that ruby red into here. So we're going to get mixtures of these things. And this will start to be just like I had with my initial sheet there that I showed you. And I'm going to take a little more of the ochre. So you can be real free if you're following along and you're doing this right now. You can be very, very free with doing so. So I'm gonna keep going with this yellow ochre, with the Japanese orange, with the let's get some magenta in there as well. And I'm sort of getting different variations across the whole surface. So you're not. One thing about this, you're not right or wrong. It's not one of those things. It's not as if we were creating a realistic portrait, let's say, right? When you're doing that and you don't get the nose in the right place, the eyes are too wide, your portrait subject can end up looking like a wide mouth bass or something like that if the eyes are too far apart. So there's a lot of things we have to contend with in doing something like that, but working like this, we don't have to. So, as I'm covering the rest of this surface, and what'll happen is this, obviously it's wet right now, of course, but when it dries, Flash, it ends up being very, very matte, a very, very matte surface. And, the brand LeFranc Bourgeois goes back to about 1720. So it's, 300 plus years. Wow. Yeah. 300, which is just 300 on 1 year actually now. Kind of had an anniversary last year, of course. But Flash itself is what we call a vinyl resin paint. So it's a water-based paint, just like acrylic, but it's a vinyl resin emulsion that was created in 1954. And thinking of that, and I'm going to move over. I'm going to get more oranges in over here. And I'm actually going to drop in one of the other colors I used, not necessarily in this, but mixing with some others, is the Japanese yellow light. I'm going to actually use a little bit of that and just kind of brighten up this section down here. And then we'll let that dry. But it was created in 1954, actually before acrylic paints. Our sister brand, Liquitex, water-based acrylics were created in 1955, 56. So this predates this. And it was used for theater sets. So for set design. And when you see that it dry, and let me bring that other one back here. See here, we've got the same light source, right? But now I can turn this in raking light any way that I want towards, I have a light source over that way, got a light source over that way, and I got a light source that way, coming all over. And when you see this, it's very flat. So, well, why is that desirable? It's desirable in set design because you don't want stage lighting to hit and make a glare or a hot spot behind actors. I also tend to like that myself in my own work because I find it, so you've got some of my work back here on my studio wall. I'm not a good photographer. My brother's a photographer. My wife is a photographer. I stink at it. And I think because of phones these days, we all tend to think, oh, I can take a photo, right? We're all carrying around a camera, but there's a real skill set to that. And when I have a really shiny surface, it can be hard to shoot a photograph of that and not have a glare or a hot spot. And that's terrible if I want to show my work somewhere or as representative of my work. Very hard to do. So I like the matte surface. I can easily shoot it. And later on, if I wanted, I could put a gloss varnish on it if that's the sheen I wanted later on. But I really like the matte surface for doing that. So, theater set design. What intrigued me about, and I'll be talking about Matisse throughout this whole demo today, this whole workshop with you guys. But one of the reasons I was, aside from always being a sort of person I liked quite a bit as an artist, is that Matisse did some theater set designs himself as well. So I really liked that link to it. Now, Matisse did not use Flash. Matisse actually died in 1954. He was born in the 1800s. He died at about the age of 81, I think 80, 81. You can fact check me on that, but I'm close enough. And since we're not in an art history class right now, and I don't have a grade on the line, I'm not too concerned. But I think about 80, 81 in 1954. And while I have this on the brush, I don't have a lot of color on the brush right now. And I'm actually going to drag it. Watch this. Just sort of, I'm going to actually tap it on my rag off to the side. And I'm going to drag across the surface. Now, see what happens when I do that? When I drag sort of a dry brush across the surface, you get a texture, which I feel is very much like leaves as well. Now, I didn't necessarily do that in this one. I kept the paint more wet and blended it a bit more, but that's certainly an option as well. So I'm just going to do a little bit more on this, and we're going to let it dry. Now, it'll dry depending on your atmosphere in your studio. Some of that's actually already dry in the short amount of time we've been doing this. And let me look off to the side here. I have a thermometer on my wall. It is 70 Fahrenheit in my studio right now. And wow, and it's 70% humidity in here, which does not feel like that. It's usually not that humid in here. It doesn't feel like that. So if you think about it, the temperature's a little elevated, and probably because of the lights here, not all over my studio. But so you have warmer temperature, which will cause a water-based paint to dry fairly quickly. But then more humidity will cause it to not dry so much, right? Because humidity is moisture in the air. So you really want to think about your own space. And a lot of times people will ask me that when using a water-based product, how long will it take to dry? Has a lot to do with the atmosphere in your own workspace, but in a matter of minutes if you're not going too thick. So just something to keep in mind there. Now, this is
Jimmy,
pretty, yeah.
So actually, Bobby asked, I love a little bit earlier, and you just addressed it, but hopefully we can expand on it. I love any tricks keeping it wet longer, or if you have any leftover paint, any way to save it before it dries. And
sure.
And they asked about mediums also.
Yeah, that's all good questions. So I got a triple shot there. So what we'll do, let's see if I can address that in order there. Yeah, you could spritz with a water bottle. I have one over on the other side of the studio, but you know what a water bottle looks like, right? I don't need that. So you could spritz with that. The thing with Flash, so I mentioned it's a vinyl emulsion as opposed to an acrylic emulsion. And I'm going to get a little sciencey here for a minute, and it doesn't require that you understand it, but it's got a longer molecule chain. And that means a vinyl based emulsion is more flexible than an acrylic, and it can actually take on more water. A lot of times with acrylics, we don't like to put a lot. I usually tell people like 15%, 20% water to your acrylics if you're thinning them with water, because I don't want you to make it to have it under adhere to the surface. Because think about what we do when we clean off our brush in water. What are we doing? Water's our solvent. A lot of times we think of the word solvent and we think of harsh things like turpentine or mineral spirits. But for a water-based paint, water is your solvent. With Flash, you can go up to about 25%. So just spritzing that while it's on a surface will do that. If you wanted to keep it, I'm sure, Tara, you probably have these at Plaza. I don't want to speak out of turn, but there's a company called Masterson, which makes a stay wet palette. So you do have those, Tara? I see you nodding. Yeah. That's sort of think of it like a humidor for cigars, right? You want to keep something humid. So the Masterson Stay Wet palette is a plastic palette that has a lid. It's got a very, very thin, spongy sort of surface, and then a paper that goes on top of that, like a disposable palette paper that I'm using. And if that's damp in there and your colors are in there and you put the lid on there, that can keep them moist from a session to another session. So that's one way. And there was a third part of that, Tara. I addressed spritzing it with water to keep it wet, the palette. What was the other one? Or did I answer, was it the time to dry? I might have answered that one. Good question. I think you said that was Bob maybe asked that question. That was a good question. Okay, so I'm gonna hit there's a few more spots. Let me go back to my overhead view. Yeah, there's a few spots here I just want to drag some color over, and then we're going to set this aside to dry. And while we do that, the next thing I want to do, tell you more about the product, tell you more about Matisse, but I want to start getting you to put down your colors. Let's put this off to the side for the greens that we have in here. Okay, so now in doing that, here's what I used for this. The greens I used were this one called, this is a bright green is what this one's called, bright green. I also used this one, a really, really soft, almost pastel color. This one's called water green. I warmed those up a little bit in some cases with the Japanese yellow light. And I also made them a bit darker in some cases with the turquoise. So I'm gonna put some of those, I'm gonna use this same palette right here. And I'm gonna put some of those colors down. I'm gonna make sure that my palette knife doesn't have any oranges or reds on it, because I don't want to, as I reach into the jar, I don't want to infect this. And I just want to show you something. I wrote something on the top to remind myself before I open this up. I want to show you something here. So I wrote here that this contains titanium white, that's my little abbreviation, titanium white, phthalo green, and Hansa yellow light. I wrote on this one that it also contains titanium white, also contains phthalo green. And I want to show you something. I'm going to need my glasses here for this one. I want to show you the back of the jars. This is what's called your color index number. So it says PW6 and PG7. So what does that mean? The P means pigment. The W means white. The other P means pigment again. The other G means green. And then the numbers are when they were categorized just chronologically as color index numbers. So look at this now. Water green, you can see that color. Titanium white, so that's the color index number for titanium white, PW6, and then PG7 for phthalo green. Okay, keep that in mind, keep this color in mind. We'll leave it right there so you don't forget that. Now, if we look at the back here too, we see once again PW6, and we know that's titanium white. We see PG7, pigment green 7, we know that's phthalo green. But look what happens. Now we have PY, and you can do the guesswork there, right? P is pigment again. Y in this case is yellow, and PY3 happens to correspond with Hansa yellow light. So look what happens here. The bright green is made bright by that additional third pigment there, the PY3. So if you know that, this is why this is some good, valuable information. Is it great to have a bunch of different colors? Sure. However, if you are in a situation where you know about color index numbers, and what you can always do, you can always Google that. So you can just put in your search engine, you can put whatever you see on the back, whatever color index number. If it's PB29, which happens to be pigment blue 29, that happens to be ultramarine blue. If you don't know that, you can just Google pigment PW29, and you'll be able to find that very easily. So you can look at the back of your other tubes or jars of paint. So if you had a titanium white and you had a Hansa yellow and you had a phthalo green, you could put those three together to make that bright green. You'd have to toy around with your ratios. That's not on there, but I just want to give you information that lets you be, you know, a little bit more creative with what you're doing right there. So let's go back to our overhead view. I'm going to put some of those out. And here is that you can see them better now. And you can see the viscosity when I do that. So there's our water green. That's water green. I'm going to wipe that off because I'm dipping, you know, rather than a tube, I'm dipping into the jar. So I want to be careful. Again, I don't want to, you know, contaminate one color to the next. Here's my bright green. So look at that difference between what the Hansa Yellow Light Edition does. And then you can imagine, of course, if we put out the Japanese Yellow Light, which actually already had some of that on the palette there, I could make those even brighter. And if I put out, this is a pretty one. This is our turquoise. I could certainly add that and make them darker. It doesn't matter if you use these on your own. It doesn't matter if you mix them. I did a little of both for these swatches of collage paper that I was going to you know, use to mimic the concept, the abstract concept of grass. So let's show you that here. And let me put my lids back on. Always do that. That'll help paint from drying out, number one. Also help you from knocking it over with your elbow or something like that, having paint go everywhere, which is a nightmare. So I'm going to take my palette knife. I'm just going to mix. Let me show you what happens here if we take a little bit of this water green off to the side. And let's add a little bit of that Japanese yellow light. You can see I'm starting to bring that a little bit more closer to what we have right there in the bright green. I'll add a little bit more there, but not quite so much. It's different. It's different because that's a different yellow than Hansa yellow. And what I'm going to do right here, I'm going to do the same kind of thing. I want to show you, I want to keep showing you this piece because I'm not trying to mimic this exactly. These were flat colors I laid down, but I want to take a different approach, just like I did with my leaves. And I want to be a little bit more painterly. Again, if you want to put down a very flat coat of paint, awesome, do that. If you want to be a little more painterly, like I'm starting to do here, that's cool too. Again, no right or wrong. And what I'll do here is I'm going to remove another sheet of paper here. And I could leave it in the pad, but once again, I'm just doing that so it's easier when it's wet to move off to the side. Doing that. So I'll put that there. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to lay some of that color down right here. Now, when we're talking about the range of flash, there's 76 colors. I have some others in my studio that if we get a little further along and you guys are cutting out some shapes, I will I'll show you some of those, some that we won't necessarily be using today. But I'll show you, we've got 76 different colors. Now, among those 76 different colors, there's 38 single pigments. Now, I just showed you those tubes, right, or jars. And I showed you the different pigments they have in them. So they would be mixed pigments. But we have single pigments as well. So one made with just one pigment. We've got 6 fluorescent colors as well. So I'm going to go a little bit with this next strip. I'm going to kind of make another strip here. And I'm going to get brighter using that Japanese yellow light. And I'm going to brighten up that bright green even more. I want to give myself a different variation of green. Now, it doesn't matter if those two mix. So I'm, you know, I can close the gap between those things. It's okay. It's not going to matter. The important thing, you know, with something like this is that you're having a little bit of fun with it. That's the important thing. And I'm going to mix a little bit more. I'm going to use more of that water green, and I'm going to get it more toned down. green over here. So just taking that bright green, taking that water green, taking the Japanese yellow light, I can get different variations of green in there, which I think are kind of fun. There's also colors that are opaque and colors that are transparent. So if I come back and I show you our jars right here, let's see, where do we have it? Right here, this little symbol that sort of looks like a diver down logo, half black, half white square, that would be a semi-opaque color. All right, so covers somewhat good, semi-opaque. This one, the Naples yellow, if that's totally a black square, that lets you know that that's an opaque cover. So that's going to cover really well, right? That's going to cover whatever surface you're using really well. Maybe it's not something that's super, super dark. And then let's see if I have a transparent one here. I don't know if I do actually. There's not a lot of transparent colors in the range. There's only 8. So I don't think we're using any transparents today. But if we were, instead of that filled in square, you would just see an outline of a square right there. That's what you would have right there. So that's kind of an overview of the range from Flash. Now it's similar. Does anybody know? I don't know if anybody knows acrylic gouache, what that is, or what actually traditional gouache is. So gouache is an opaque watercolor, and it's very, very matte, very, very matte. It's water-based, and it has a very good covering strength. So very similar to what's happening here with Flash. The difference is using, if you have a traditional gouache, which is really just an opaque watercolor, it can be re-wet with water. So you know from using a watercolor in the past, if you get any water on a watercolor surface, it's going to bleed and everything. When this is dry, this will be permanent. So if we had water on top of this after the fact, or I spilled a little water, there wouldn't be any issue here. Again, this would dry very, very matte like gouache, but it would be very flexible, very supple, very flexible, very high covering power, and again, not re-wet. So that absolute matte finish means that you're not going to have any reflections. That also means that it's going to provide a really good tooth for any painting that you do over that. So I'm going to let you, I'm going to cover a little bit more of this, but what I want to do is I want to show you, I'm going to share my screen here for a moment. And let me pull, yeah, here we go. I share my screen and I want to show you something. So here are some Matisse cutouts. So this is where the inspiration comes today for this. One of the things that Matisse would do later in his life exclusively, now early in his life, he worked on some ballets and set designs and things like that in the 1920s and so on. But Matisse suffered when he was a child, he suffered appendicitis, and his mother, when he was a very young child, gave him a paint box, and that's how he started painting. So he was sickly, and he was in bed from this terrible bout of appendicitis. And later in life, though, in the last 10 years of his life, he was actually suffering from abdominal cancer, and he was very much bound to a bed and also a wheelchair towards the end of his life in the 1940s into early 50s. So what he started doing, and I'm going to show you some in-person stuff here. Let me move this off to the side. And I want to show you these 2 books by Matisse. And what you can start doing if you've gotten to this stage right here, and you've gotten, your leafy areas covered, what we'll use for our fall looking leaves. If you've got your grassy areas covered, awesome. Let me share my screen actually one more time. Actually I can do it this way. I don't have to do that. If we're there, then what I want you to do on another piece of paper, what I used here was this color Blue Lagoon, this very sky blue color. And you can paint a strip. Yeah, if you had a little room over here, you could do it actually. You could paint a strip for the sky. And then the last thing, you can use yellow ochre and fill up a whole sheet for yellow ochre. And I'll do that in a bit as well. But what I want to show you right now, actually, let me break out that sheet. I'm going to show you these books by Matisse, but I'm also going to try to paint at the same time. totally different in a studio when you're working. And again, if you have questions, not just about the product, but I don't know how many fellow artists I suppose you know quite a few. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, I'm not sure. Now you know me. And if you want to ask any question about being an artist, about process, inspiration, about anything, I'm an open book here, folks. So I'm super pleased to be at your disposal today. And I'm gonna because I'm gonna use this yellow ochre, I'm gonna put it straight onto the surface right here. I didn't know we had closed caption there. I see that popping up. I didn't see that. That's pretty cool. I don't know if I've ever been closed captioned before. So I'm going to brush some of that out. I'm going to set it off to the side, and I'll kind of continue to do that. But I want to show you these two Matisse books and show you where this inspiration comes from. This one is super, super, super cool. I really love it. So I want to be careful not to get any paint on it. Although I got to say that Matisse probably wouldn't be too terribly upset if I did, maybe, being an artist. So I want to show you the inside of this. I bought this in an antique store many, many years ago in New England, and it's called Matisse Jazz. And what was super cool, I live here in New Jersey, and I've been to the Museum of Modern Art many times. And you can see right here, if I open it up, it was printed for the members of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So this was a member thing. And I remember seeing that, and I was like, oh, well, that's really cool. And then I flipped the page here, and it says the Museum of Modern Art was honored in 1948. So this would have been 6 years before the death of Matisse. So it was honored in 1948 in receiving as a gift of the artist one of 100 copies of Matisse's portfolio, Jazz. The complete set of plates has twice been exhibited at the museum in 1948 and again in the summer of 1960. When a series of jazz concerts was presented Thursday evenings in the museum's sculpture garden. So if you go back to Matisse, this was a series based on jazz. I love this one. It's very, very lyrical. And what he was doing, so here was his situation. He was ill in the last portion of his life, like I said, bound to a wheelchair and a bed. So his assistants would paint big sheets of paper, just like we're doing. They would paint them. Now they would use gouache. Okay, remember gouache is an opaque watercolor. They would paint these big sheets, and then Matisse would sit there and cut them out with scissors, these shapes. And he would sometimes pin them in different compositions, but he would also have his assistants put them up on a wall. So he was kind of like a director, or I like to think with this, since it's jazz, kind of a conductor, although we don't necessarily think of conductors with jazz, that's more classical. But you can see here how this relates to this very concept that I wanted to deal with today of having all these layers and fun lyrical shapes. Here's Matisse doing this in this little jazz book. You can even see this person. You imagine that they're singing. There's these, shouts or exclamations coming out of their mouth. So these are called the Matisse Cutouts. I like them. I'm going to show you one in another book, one I really like, but you see shapes here as well. Some of these shapes were also inspired by the sea, and I liked them so much that many, many years ago, they made their way here. These very abstract kind of Matisse-like shapes. So I was really kind of taken with them many, many years ago. And let's see if there's another one in here. Yeah, this is interesting. So what we'll be doing shortly is cutting things out with scissors. And I like this. This is from Matisse. Drawing with scissors. Drawing with scissors. I love that. To cut right into color makes me think of a sculptor carving into stone. This book has been conceived in that spirit. That's awesome. I think that's super, super cool. Drawing with scissors. What a super great and cool concept. So I love that book. If you ever find one somewhere in the antique store, pick it up. It's kind of rare. I don't know if it's worth anything, but it doesn't matter to me. It's something I love to have in my collection. This one, of course, you can buy. I'm sure you can find that anywhere. And this is just a book called Matisse. And it's by the publisher Taschen. I think that's how you say that. And I cut out a few, or not cut out, I put some Post-its on a few pages, and I'm going to show you those. But let me finish putting down the rest of my color here. I'm going to be free with this base too. You know, in the finished piece that I've been showing you guys, I used yellow ochre exclusively. I'm adding in a little Naples yellow. So my whole approach here today is I'm not laying down flat color like I originally did. I'm laying down more painterly swatches of color. And I'm doing that just to show you that there's other ways of doing stuff. There's always other ways of doing stuff. I mean, that's the whole joy of making art. That's the whole joy of it. Now, Flash itself is actually really, really good for painting outdoors. Like I said, it's a vinyl emulsion. Vinyl is part of the plastics family, just like acrylics are. But because vinyl is so flexible, it is really great for outdoor where we have humidity changes. So really great for outdoor murals. And again, we're thinking of murals, thinking of a lot of large scale work. We're working very small scale, but Matisse would work very, very large scale, often very, very large scale. And I'll show you that in just a second in our book. Okay, I'm going to move this off to the side. I may cover the rest of it, but you get the idea. Let me show you a few things for inspiration. So you have homework. I want you to look at Matisse. Now, if you end up starting to look at my work, I want to show you this drawing first, which doesn't have anything to do with our work. I want to show you this because Matisse could draw. A lot of times people will see work by an artist that is semi-abstract or abstract. And remember, abstract only means to simplify. That's what abstract is. So a stick figure is really an abstraction. And we know that stick figure to be a person. So it's a round shape for the head and sticks for the legs, body, and torso. But Matisse could really draw in a classical sense. And he chose to move away from that and expand his aesthetics a bit. And so if we jump forward here, this, let me move my sheet here. This is not towards the end of his life. This is in the 1930s. He was not bound to a chair, a wheelchair, or a bed at this time. And if you've ever been to the Barnes Collection in Philadelphia, the Barnes Collection is a group, it's one of the best collections of Impressionist work in the entire country. And Matisse created a mural for the interior in these archways of the Barnes Museum. And he did that. They were painted in oil, but he did his studies with cutouts first. So he could put these big things up on a wall in a very large studio and see what they were going to look like here. And this was called the dance. And he could see what they look like before actually painting them on large scale. And then here, you know, we look and we actually see Matisse there. He's sitting and he's cutting out, and you can see those shapes. There he is. This is 1947. So this would have been about 7 years before his death, about maybe 6 years after being diagnosed with abdominal cancer. And I imagine in the 1940s that, you know, that would be grueling now. I imagine that would be extremely grueling then. But he, you know, like artists don't retire. He just kept at it. But I love that he found a way to keep doing it. And that's fascinating to me. I can't stand at the easel. I can't do these things, but I can direct assistance and I can say, let's put this color on this paper. Hand me that. Let me cut this, pin this there, move it here. That's super, super cool to me. Just a super, super cool concept. And I have a few more. Yeah, look at this. So this is in a chapel in France. So I want you to look at those stained glass windows. And here, if I move over, there's his cutouts for the stained glass. So this is him again, having either if he could do it or having the assistants paint with gouache on the paper and then him cut out and then arrange them to design the windows in this chapel over here and the windows that we see right here as well. I've been to France a number of times. I've not had the chance to see this yet, and that's a thing that's on my travel list at some point, you know, in time. That's in the south of France, and these ones, these are just so these are fun. I mean, this is just, you know, here, we don't need a title. This is actually called Creole Dancer. And we can sort of see a face right here, and maybe some sort of costume. But if we didn't have that, I don't think that's necessary. Matter of fact, I would say to you, the next time you're at a gallery or a museum, you get to do that. Go look at the work without looking at the title. Don't give yourself a predisposed idea of what it is, because this could easily be a plant, couldn't it? And it evokes that kind of, you know, spiky plant, and just it evokes fun to me. And here, you know, we have images of the sea. This is called de la mer, so de la mer, of the sea. And you see fish-like shapes. You see these tendrils. They might be seaweed. You see other things. You know, maybe there's things that are plankton and such. And I want to show you a few more Matisse images here. Once again, a large-scale mural here. This would be at the Carnegie Museum, or some people say Carnegie. I don't know which one's right. I like Carnegie. But the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, large-scale mural. So still managing to do this stuff at the end of his life. And you can see here some very semi-abstract shapes of people playing instruments and such. I think I have one more I wanted to show. Yeah, look at that. Isn't that just fun? I imagine just having, gosh, I'd love to have a whole giant, I'd love to see that on a 50-foot wall somewhere. That's just, I think of Matisse as being very joy-like in a lot of his work. And what's interesting, I don't know, I don't have it marked in here, but I may be able to find it quickly for you. I won't belabor that because I want to get back to the project here, but I did want to inspire you with Matisse a little bit. There is an image called The Red Studio. And yeah, it doesn't matter. It's okay. You look it up, called The Red Studio. Very bold, very red. And one of the things with Matisse is that he said he wanted his work, and I might, this won't be verbatim, I might get this just a little bit off, but nonetheless, he would say that he wanted his work to be somewhat like an armchair in which to rest from fatigue. Roughly the point. He wanted his work to be somewhat like an armchair to rest from fatigue, right? So comfortable, maybe something that brings solace, maybe something that brings joy. So this is a guy who started off his early life with appendicitis and bound in bed, lived through World War I and World War II, and died of abdominal cancer, which again has to be grueling now with modern medicine, but in the 1940s, wow, right? And still maintained that, and he maintained such a work ethic. So while you might not see Matisse come out in my work, although if I showed you work from 20 years ago, you actually would see some of it come out. But it's just, I love the story. It's a really good story. So anyway, let's get back to, that's where this project comes from today. I'm going to set that off to the side. And that Matisse book does have, let's go back to my overhead view. That Matisse book does have a lot of paint on it because it's been in the studio and stuff like that. So I'm going to come back here to our initial sheet of paper right here. So I want to show you the leaves I picked from my backyard right there. And I want to show you in my original here. So if you look in the original, there's leaves that look like a maple leaf, right? There's these sort of teardrop shaped leaves. I don't know what they are. I'm terrible at knowing the species. It's always been something I wanted to do. I need to put it on a list and do that. But here's, you know, a leaf like that, a very teardrop shape, whatever that is. And then you can see where I took more inspiration from Matisse, and I had areas where there's maybe this spiky edge that might have been where I cut this out. And then I just used it. Something else was cut out here and I just used it. Because if I look around when leaves fall on the ground, some of them look perfectly shaped and formed. Some of them start to develop little holes in them. Some of them start to curl. Some of them start to tear. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use these as inspiration. And a better word, a reference. So when I say that, I want you to take this away from here today. The word reference. Sometimes I work from a reference photo. What does that mean? Break the word down. I refer to it. So when I work from a reference photo, I do a lot of landscapes. You can see some of them back here on the wall. There's some snow scenes from winter and such. But I do a lot of that. I like to paint plein air, that is in the field. But I also will paint from reference photos. So rather than try to exactly mimic something, I refer to my photo and take elements from that. So I want to think of the leaves as the same way. They're a leaping off point, a springboard, a reference. I don't know, add a bunch of other synonyms for yourself in there if you like. And what I'm going to do, though, I'm going to think, and just to give you an idea of scale here, I'm going to grab my ruler. And I'm going to look over here. And, you know, this little leaf up in this corner, it's about, let's flip it this way. I do better with inches. It's about 2.5 inches across. Yeah, that's probably the biggest one that I have there. Maybe this one's maybe about 3. So they're about 2.5, 3. Some of these smaller ones are an inch, 3/4 of an inch, something like that. So in that 1 inch to 3 inch range. And I didn't think about that a whole lot. I just kind of thought about, obviously, if I cut something out this big, it's a little too big life size for the sheet of paper. So I'm just going to come in with a pencil. And
Hey, Jimmy.
yeah, shoot.
Okay, so I know Phyllis asked, I noticed my brushes were really held the color after trying to wash them out. What do you recommend for cleaning brushes thoroughly? Does the vinyl emulsion, hold on to the brush hairs more than acrylic necessarily?
Yeah, good question. Good question. I don't necessarily find that it holds on more. These are definitely highly pigmented. They're really bold colors. So you will find that they should be quite strong. And I'm just, while I'm talking here, let's bring that up. You're not going to see that real well, but I'm just kind of drawing out, approximate shapes. Don't think, oh, I don't know how to draw a leaf. Basic concepts. And let me leave that up here. This one, if I just look at it, really has, this main section, 2 other offshoots, and another here, sort of a 5-pointed star. Sorry, I'm going to answer that other question. I'll get back to that about the brush. But Sarah Wade says, I just saw it pop up. Why not draw on the white side? I could draw on the white side, except I want the color images to show. I want to be able to see that. So, I suppose, wait, I get your question. I didn't get that at first. So that's actually, yeah, you could do that. You could draw the shapes here. You could do that, Sarah. Good thinking. I'm just happen to be doing, you know what, Sarah, my brain didn't work that way. And the only difference would be is if I wanted to, get more of a shape out of this color than out of that one, but it really doesn't matter. So yeah, if it's easier to see what you're drawing and do on the white side, mate, I like that, Sarah. Good question. Yeah. And isn't that the thing about art, right? Is like, when you ask that question, I'm like, wait, I don't get it. Well, how would I do that? And I'm like, oh yeah, right. So smart question. Okay. The brush itself. I don't know. I gotta say, I'm not having that problem. But I would really say be a bit, really kind of work it into a rag or paper towel. Again, I like a rag just so I can, get as much stuff off and not waste paper towels. And then once I do that, I'll kind of squeeze from the ferrule out like that. And then I can clean off in my water. And, I could then squeeze from there, but you can see I am getting it all out of there. Now, one of the things that could happen is, and I don't know in this case, but if you get paint up past the ferrule, so the ferrules are metal part, just in case anybody doesn't know. If you get paint up into there, then some of that can be harder to get out because it gets stuck up there. And as you keep swishing it around, more and more comes into the hair. So I can't for certain say if that's the shape, but usually just wiping a whole lot off, squeezing it out with a rag, then swishing it out in the water and squeezing more out usually does the trick for me. And then after that, at the end of a cleaning session, you could use a little bit of soap and water or a brush cleaner. But yeah, anyway, that should do the trick.
I have a follow-up really quick.
Yeah, please.
So the cotton brushes that were included in the sample kit, are synthetic. Is there, synthetics are typical for acrylics? Is they clean more easily, and they they hold the paint. Is it the same suggestion for Flash as far as preference on types of brushes?
Sure. Yeah. Good question. And I'm gonna take Sarah's suggestion. I'm gonna draw on the white side just so you guys can see what I'm doing here. I don't know why I'm so fascinated by that question. I guess
Sarah for the win.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess because it's just like it's kind of like when somebody, I don't know, when the IT guy says, "Did you turn off your computer?" Right. Sometimes the simplest things are the smartest things. So, yeah, Sarah for the win.
Right.
Yeah. So here's one thing I would say about, well, there's a ton. We could do a whole session just on brushes, quite frankly.
I know.
Yeah, it's a big topic, but for the sake of this right here, as I draw and talk, like chewing gum and walking sometimes for me. Yeah, synthetic brushes sometimes are much easier with either the vinyl-based flash or an acrylic emulsion. Often, if you have a natural watercolor brush, natural hair watercolor brush, the acrylics will stick to that a whole lot more. That can become more of an issue. Also, I would say this too, not that we're doing this today, but you know, could you use the rhetorical, or not rhetorical, but my question to myself, or sometimes people have asked me, could I use a oil brush, a hog hair brush for acrylics or for flash? And I would say, yeah, you absolutely could. But one thing you want to think about that, when you use a oil-based, a natural hog hair brush for painting with oils, oil or hog hair doesn't love at all, really doesn't like it at all. It does not like water a whole lot. It can tend to lose its shape. And I think about your own hair. Our own hair actually likes oil. You know, you'll often read sometimes it's, I'm just going to make another shape here, more of a teardrop shape. Our own hair likes oil, and it's sometimes not good to actually wash our hair constantly. So when we use a hog hair brush, a natural brush like that, and we use it with water, it can get really kind of floppy and stuff. And that's sort of how our own hair acts when it's very, very humid out and such. But yeah, the synthetic brushes are, I think, one of the best ways to go, really. And there are, you know, the common brush is a synthetic watercolor brush, really. So it could be a watercolor brush. Again, take a look at what you're buying, using, whatever that is, and try to avoid a natural hair brush. Just be a little tougher to clean. It's not to say you couldn't do it. And I'm just kind of sketching out a bunch of different shapes here. And I'm being really free again with the shapes. So you can see this is similar, you know, similar to that shape. This is somewhat similar, although more spiky, maybe a little more spiky, not so much to this shape right here or to the maple. I think that's a maple. So just kind of playing with those shapes. And once you have a bunch of shapes like that, I'm going to take a board. I've got the bottom of it's just the bottom of another pad. I'm going to use that. I could use scissors, and I might use some scissors, but I'm going to use just an X-Acto knife here on this one because it's got so many little spiky features. And I think that's a little big, so I'm actually going to cut to the inside of that a little. And once again, it doesn't matter if I don't follow the lines exactly. It doesn't matter at all. That's what's kind of nice about organic stuff. Like, so I started out my in graduate school. I studied at the New York Academy of Art in Manhattan, and we studied the human figure and portraiture, and we studied you know, in the way of the academies in the 1800s and so on, and even earlier. So very, very traditional methods, right? And in doing so, we learned to paint in a very traditional, realistic manner. And I like that education. I like that I had that. But I also really kind of like to move away from that and be a little bit more free. And I do a lot of landscapes today based on travel. And one of the things I love about landscape, and landscape is what? It's organic, right? And that's what we're dealing right now with these leaves. We're dealing with an organic shape. And I'm just flipping this around each different way because it's easier to cut that way. by rotating the paper. But what I like about organic shapes is that you can be quite free with them, right? So if I make the stem a little bit thicker or a little bit thinner, it could be either one of those things, right? Because if you go out in your own yard or wherever you are and you take a look at leaves, yeah, maple leaves look like maple leaves and oak look like oak and so on and so on. But each leaf might have slightly different dimensions and variations. They're not, exact. So I really kind of enjoy that way of being free, or even a tree, right? A tree, where the leaf comes from. I'm going to see if I cut through enough to pop that out. I think I have to go through just a little bit more. But I like that idea. I think it's very, very freeing. And, and a lot of times if you're in like an art class somewhere, you might paint a still life. And the reason that people would, and still do in art schools would work from a still life is because, first of all, it never moves. It's very, very constant. You can put a light source on and it doesn't move. And it's good training, but you do need to get everything to be, quite accurate if you're trying to get a representational image. But a tree might look different from day to day, specifically in the fall when it starts to lose leaves, or maybe it's lost some branches, or maybe, you've come to the same spot on vacation for years and it's grown or it's been trimmed. So there's just a lot of leeway. And, if you were to paint even a very specific tree and you made it a little bit smaller, let's say, than it actually was in real life, well, that'd be okay too. Like I said, if you paint a figure, you really kind of gotta get it right. If big if, right? If you're working, in a representational mode. So I imagine Matisse looking at things for inspiration, but then being quite free with what he was doing. Now, if you're using an X-Acto knife, scissors, can be easier depending on the shape. But an X-Acto knife, you always want to make sure that it's quite sharp. I say that to you right now because I don't think I changed this blade. I probably need to, so I'm working more than I need to cut out this this shape right here. I think the scissors are a little more fun, actually, so I'm going to cut out the other shapes with the scissors, but I do want to get this one popped out of here. There we go. Now it's starting to pop. There you go. And I wanted to get it to pop out so that it's got clean edges. And I can always clean them up a little bit more with a scissor if I wanted to. Yeah, and I'll do that because you can see I didn't cut all the way through there. I got a little bit of a white edge. I could also touch that up. That wouldn't be a big deal. I could touch it up as well, but I could cut with my scissors. So that's a cool, fun shape. What I like about that too, I imagine something like this. You could actually make a collage like this and laminate it, and it could be it could be something that you could frame, and it could just be an image, right? But it's also something you could laminate and I don't know, use as some sort of place setting, or it's also something you could do on a smaller scale and create a greeting card or something like that. I love the idea of, I don't know, we live in a time, obviously we're using technology right now, aren't we? And it's brilliant. It's a fantastic thing to be able to do. However, I think that's why people appreciate more and more. And I think we've found this in a pandemic. If you've taken the time to write a note to somebody, like literally actually, remember mailing things? If you've taken the time to do that, or written a thank you note or something to somebody, they're so appreciative because it doesn't happen anymore. And the idea of, creating something as a little gift for somebody, or, if our holidays end up being a little bit more normal and you're going to actually see someone, to have some sort of gift or send a card, I think is just an unexpected joy in a fast-paced electronic age, which again has a million advantages to it. but makes everything all the more special. So I like that. That's kind of cool, right? That's how getting that variation of color on there gives me an actual leafy like sort of feeling to that. And let me cut out this other one up top here, and then what I want to do is we'll cut out some of the rest, and I'll talk to you about composing your composition with this. Now, with Flash, let's get back to the product itself while I cut out this other piece. With Flash, it's something that you can obviously use out of the jar, out of the tube, exactly as it is. Doesn't need to be thinned, although you can thin it with water. The one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to make it very, very thick. It was conceived to be, and I'm just going to cut right through here, just like that, and then come in here and cut out the rest of my shape. It's not meant to be very, very thick. If you get it very, very thick, it can tend to be a bit brittle, and that's just the nature of the vinyl emulsion itself if you get too thick. So it's really something that's meant to be painted on in a thinner fashion, in a much thinner fashion. So just kind of keep that in mind. And it's also something too, a lot of times with acrylics, like if I was to speak about our sister brand Liquitex, gosh, we have, I think what do we have? 53 different mediums or something like that, which is pretty awesome because mediums can really customize your colors a great deal. So there's a great advantage to that. But it can also be, if you don't have a lot of experience with mediums, it can also be quite confusing. And with Flash, we really don't recommend mediums with Flash. Again, conceived as that paint that was meant originally for set design. And to think about that concept, and there's that shape. We could change that shape if we wanted. I like that though. When I even using these little drawings and whatnot, I'm not cutting like when little kids in a kindergarten used to learn scissors, and they're taught to really keep on the line, which is really just to build motor skills. It's not for art purposes. It's just for dexterity. That's why they do that. That's why they start having kids use scissors. But with this, I'm definitely not worried about that, because I'm not worried about my dexterity. I think whatever I've got, and that's about it. But I am again just thinking of my leaves and my drawings here of leaves as references for shapes. But going back to set design, when you think about that, I'm going to move this off the side. There's obviously more I could cut out, but look at that too. You start to look at negative space. There could be interesting things that you could actually do by cutting out everything with a X-Acto knife, and go over top, or creating a stencil or doing something else. That was my little spray paint noise, creating a stencil or something like that there. But when you think about Flash being designed as a set design, it wasn't meant to be thick. And I'm just going to use my ruler here. Wasn't meant to be thick because in set design, we don't want to get very thick, or don't have a need, I should say, to be very thick. I'm going to make this one about an inch wide, roughly, about an inch wide, this strip. Because when you're looking at something on a set, it is seen from afar. So thick impasto brushstrokes don't serve a purpose. They really don't serve a purpose at all. And I'm thinking about, again, sort of grass shapes. Grass colors, not grass shapes. These could be very, very straight like this, but I want different thicknesses. I will stick to the line here and cut that out. And I'll do that with this one as well. And you can see, I'll show you the finished piece again in a minute, just to kind of give you a little bit of my thought pattern. Not only the project itself, but thinking about arrangements of things. I thought about how, again, Matisse is very lyrical. So this goes this way, this kind of goes, these sort of fan out a little bit. They move in different directions. And the way the leaves are placed are sort of all over the place and random. Random because leaves fall in that way. And I think a lot of the things that he did of the sea was like that as well. I'm going to set this strip off to the side, and I'm going to make this, I made that I don't know, I made that one, I said 1 inch, right? So I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger, about 1.5 inches. Yeah, about 1.5 inches. Just because I want things, the one thing I think with Matisse, what he was really good at doing is dealing with variety. You know, so whenever you make something in art, whatever it is, you think about what we call elements of design. We think about rhythm, variety, scale, proportion. So every time I make something, you've heard people say this before, maybe you've even said it. If somebody sees art and they're not somebody who makes art, a lot of times they say, oh, I couldn't even draw a straight line. You know, to which my response always was, well, straight lines aren't actually all that fun. Sometimes curving lines are quite fun, and we could make this more curving. But I'm also, like I said, I arranged this in sort of a dancing pattern across the surface, so something that I could have a lot of fun with and maintain that lyricism of Matisse imagery. And I invite you to look at his paintings. There was a lovely, lovely show at the Museum of Modern Art. Oh gosh, it's probably 10 years ago now. So I've got that one and I've got this one. And actually I have that left over from cutting this. So that was kind of fortuitous. And I'm going to cut out maybe 2 more from here. And again, just getting different widths. That's all. But the show at the I think it was the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan. That show was one in which they took dresses from Matisse's collection. So Matisse would go to the fashion houses in France, and after I guess when they were out of fashion, he would it's going to be 1.5 inches. He would buy these dresses, and then he would have models wear them in his studio and make paintings of them. They were beautiful patterns, just like the cutouts, right? Really beautiful patterns. And what they did at this show is they actually had some of the original dresses. So they put them in shadow boxes up on the walls next to the paintings of the models in those very dresses. And it was really stunning to see first of all, the gorgeous fashion itself, right? Which is its own art form. And then to see how Matisse use them, like I said, as a reference, how he kind of played around with the form. Sometimes he was a little bit more, I guess, kind of stuck to the actual pattern a little bit more. And you could see in other ways where he kind of, he pushed the boundaries a little bit. So a lot of fun with that. So I'm going to cut out this piece, and I'm just going to cut out 1 more. And what I didn't do, I'm going to do this. And if you didn't do it yet, that's okay. But I'm going to put down some of this. Remembered all this talking about Matisse. He had assistants to do this stuff. I do not. Now, when I was a college art professor, there was a time when I had an intern who was an assistant. Let me tell you, that spoiled the heck out of me. It was during a semester where we were kind of having students, graduating seniors, work in studios with us and kind of get a feeling of what that was like. And that was a lot of fun to mentor people that way, for sure. But alas, Matisse was much more famous than I, for sure, since I am not at all. I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to cut out this last shape for our grass-like form. And I'm going to make this rather narrow. I'm going to make this one like a half inch. I'll go half inch. I think 1/4 inch will be 2. And it doesn't matter. None of this matters, the exact sizes of things, because if you're doing something like this, it matters to stick to an actual prescribed exact method. If, like I said, if you're trying to learn very traditional methods of portraiture and you really want to get your proportions exactly correct for the portrait, then yeah, that matters. That's very important that you get those things exact. When we're doing something like this, these collage, semi-abstract collage elements, we're very, very, very free, which I think is great to deviate. And that's sort of the beauty for somebody who maybe, I don't know, not everybody loves to draw. I love drawing. I absolutely love it. But not all people do. And it's not everybody's skill set either. Definitely not everybody's skill set as an artist. And that's okay. While I think drawing is a very, very worthwhile thing to learn to do well, for my work, certainly, I'm going to set my ruler off to the side. So I'm going to take this right now. While I feel drawing is great, you know, it's definitely not necessarily for everyone. And then, you know, and I think if you think that way, if you think like, oh, drawing, you know, I must draw in a particular fashion or a particular way, then, and you don't, and, you know, or you don't have that skill set maybe, and you think like, well, then I can't be creative. That's kind of depressing to me. I don't think that should limit us. Now, there's a number of things as I start to do this, and I think about my shapes and stuff. I'm looking at this. One of the things you'll notice, I didn't paint edge to edge. I didn't do that. I did that in the original. I painted edge to edge, but here I'm doing a tremendous amount of talking and trying to do everything at the same time. So one of the things I could do is I could get everything down, and then I could just cut out of that the area that I want. So I don't, you know, you don't even have to worry about that. I could cut out a smaller area out of that. And what I'm going to start to do, this is just finishing drying. This will be dry in just a few minutes. I'm going to take some of these shapes right here. And one of the things that I would do, and what I did, let me bring back my original here. In laying this out, one of the things that I did is I tried different compositions. So I had some of these arranged in, I think I went with like 3 different ways. And what I did is I arranged things and then I took a photo of it. So that way I had a photo reference, because here's the thing, guys. If you, let's say for kicks, you put everything down on your surface and then you're like, I like the way that looks. I now have to glue it down. But now you have to move stuff to glue it down. You're not going to get it to be the same again, right? So you can lay things down. And this is any type of collage you're doing, any type of collage you're doing. Place things down, don't glue them down, take a photo and save that photo. Then try another composition. And for me, and I'm going to go face to face here with you. I want you to, because I want to stress this point. When you think about the word composition, right? And I want you to think about, even though we're dealing with visual art, I want you to think about music, because we think of composers and what do? They take notes and they take chords and they do what? They make an arrangement. They arrange them in such a way that it's pleasing to the ear. That's what artists do as well. We arrange things in a way that is pleasing to the eye. So when I start to do something like this, I'm kind of moving stuff all around on the surface in a lot of different ways to try to make sure that it works to my advantage. And so I'm going to come back to this one here that we're working on. And just about dry. You can see this is drying pretty quickly. I think I can cut that out. So I'm going to cut out my sky shape here. And I'm going to come back to my board. I'll set that off to the side, come back to my cutting board right here. I could cut on the surface. This is just a wood table that I have in my studio. So it really wouldn't matter. But I do also have paper down on that surface. So I'm just going to cut like a 1-inch strip here. And I really like, I kind of find, so I'm a painter, right? But I've done a lot of collage work, not as of late, but I've done a lot of collage work over the years. And oops, my leaves are getting in the way. And I always found it to be sort of I think this word gets thrown around a little bit, but sort of meditative in cutting out shapes and arranging them. I really kind of enjoy that process. It's funny. I was talking to students of mine when I was a college professor, and outside my studio here, I have a pathway. This studio is behind my house, and about 100 feet behind my house, maybe something like that. And when I first moved in here, I made a pathway. I had a bunch of random bricks, and I made a pathway. And I told my students that, you know what, I enjoyed that. I viewed it like an art project in how I was going to arrange these, what sort of patterns I was going to use, the different variations of colors and such. And so it was really kind of enjoyable for me, you know, the process of just arranging. So when I'm doing something like this, in the original piece, I was thinking about my background. I was thinking about these grass-like forms. And then I just thought, this is clunky to me to just have that laying on top. So I played with the concept of sort of a, you know, a basket weave almost pattern with this. And you can see in this one, I chose to go under and then over the last few there. But I could maybe go over, under an almost basket weave if I chose to do something like that. And I could play with that. And that's where I just kind of think about that. Do I like that? Does it cover up too much of one thing, not enough of another? Or is that something that's kind of fun? But here, this is almost like something, it's almost like a dance, right? These things kind of move across the surface. And that's what makes me think of Matisse. And then in laying out shapes of things, you know, I start to think like, does this orange look better on top of the screen? Or, you know, knowing that orange is the complementary color of blue, having that overlap slightly, does that work quite nicely? There's a curve to this. So does having that curve off that way, or maybe down a little lower, make more sense? You know, this one, there's more to complete this to the level that I have this one. There's more shapes that I would need to cut out, but you know, something like this, would this make sense being more central, or because it's dark, should this be against something bigger or lighter here so that it shows, rather than here where it's competing with this color, and this color? So a lot of it, again, is not necessarily right or wrong, but thinking about dark on light, light on dark, brighter color on a more subtle color, a subtle color on a brighter color, and playing with that. And I think, you know, as you start to arrange stuff, you know, it becomes more apparent. You have to ask yourself things like, if I did that, that kind of gets lost in that background. That darker shape right here needs to be on something lighter for it to kind of stand out. So I feel like it needs to be, you know, maybe up there. And if we had you know, like a lighter yellow, maybe that would work better on top of that. But even just looking at that section right there, there's sort of a dance-like movement. Now, because I know we're running out of time, one of the things Matisse would do is he would spot glue. Now, what do I mean by spot glue? This is kind of an interesting little technique for this. A lot of times we think of gluing something down because we, you know, usually when we glue something down, we're repairing something maybe. If it's not an art project, if it's something in our home, we want to really glue, and we tend to just put a ton on there. But one of the things Matisse would do is spot glue. And that's what I did with this. So if you look here, this is not glued down to the surface right here. I just have a spot or two of glue under there. And that gives everything, you can kind of see from the side, you can see underneath little areas here. And depending on how this is lit, you'll get a little bit of shadows and such. You can see that here. You can see a shadow that's happening there. It depends just on how much glue you use or how little you use. You can see a little bit of that shadow under here. So it's more of that feeling of the leaves sitting on the ground and, you know, like they are in our own yard. Because they have these hills and valleys and things like that, they land in the yard and they just have this sort of more floating motion. So what I used was, this happens to be our sister company, Liquitex satin gel. You can use gloss or matte. It really doesn't matter because you're using it on the back side of it, so you're not going to see the sheen. If you use an acrylic medium with acrylic paints and you use a satin one, it's going to make the color more satin. Obviously, matte's going to make it more matte. Gloss make it more gloss. But I'm just going to get this open and take my palette knife. And again, just make sure my palette knife is cleaned off. I had a little bit of paint I did not clean off. I could use a palette knife. I could use the brush. It really doesn't matter. But for something like this, I could take a little bit of this. I don't need a lot. Of course, it depends upon the shape itself. If I use too much, it'll end up squirting out the sides. And I might not want that. So I don't have a lot on there. A medium like that will look white. It kind of looks like white paint right now. And that's just because it has a water content in there, but it'll dry clear. Even if it didn't, it doesn't matter because we're simply using it for a glue. And you might ask, well, why not actually use a glue? Why am I using an acrylic medium? Because it's a product I already have in my studio, and acrylics make excellent adhesives. So I could take this and just place that on there like that. Again, I would shoot a photograph of this first and make sure I like my composition. And then I could begin to glue everything down and it could dance and kind of sit off the surface. So let me go back to our original here for a second as we wind down. This kind of process, I think, we talked about this as really a seasonal thing simply because this is October, although all my leaves, as we said, are green right now, and yours probably as well, if you're on the Eastern Seaboard here. But one of the things about this, I think this could easily be shapes that could be based on anything, right? They could be based on other plant-like forms. They could be based on sea forms, shells, fish, you name it. That's where your imagination, I think, comes into play, and why also I would say go back and look at Matisse. I hope sharing a little bit of his life today gives you a little bit of inspiration or desire to want to kind of take a look at him a little bit more. That's really cool. Also, I want to remind you, and I'm going to flip back on the overhead view here too. Not only, like Tara said in the beginning, for the giveaway, but one thing I didn't have on here, and I just wanna I wanna put this on real quick. And Tara, maybe you can jot this down in the chat. Is I'm gonna put one more thing I neglected to do. I forgot this. At TFACNA. TFACNA is the Fine Art Collective North America. That's our Instagram channel for our education program for all our brands. And if you go there and click on the IGTV icon at TFACNA, you'll see, I think we're up to about 55 or 60 archived 1 hour live streams that we do usually on a weekly basis. And we have about, I think we're up to 116 or maybe 120 mini demos. So I always jokingly call them art tapas, like the food, right? They're little mini bite-sized art materials demos, 3 to 5 minutes, and they're a ton of fun. So check out at TFACNA. Come check out what I'm up to at Jimmy Leslie Art, of course. Plaza _art. You don't want to miss that, and LeFranc Bourgeois Official as well. And as we close out this, I had a lot of fun talking about Matisse, talking about art, talking about supplies. But are there any final questions? Do you have a question for me just about art in general, or anything else, or the products? Or was I that clear? I never feel like I could have been that clear. Yeah. Hey, Bobby.
You definitely covered a lot, Jimmy. That's for sure. We do need to wrap up.
Yep.
I don't want anybody to feel like they didn't get their questions asked. So I'll stop talking for a second in case anyone wants to unmute themselves.
And also after the fact, Tara, if you have anything come in, and you can also, guys, if you have material stuff, the at TFACNA. You can always reach out there, just direct message there. I'm super, super happy to get questions from you. That's what we love to do. So
great.
Don't. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jimmy. This was really fantastic. And so,
My pleasure. Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure, Tara. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
all
Stay
right,
creative.
everyone have a
Stay well.
great day and take care. Bye-bye.